Well, I have to say it is a thrill to be back teaching again. I've been anticipating this day for a while. I'm glad to be back here with you in this capacity. So, at the end of the message, hopefully you're as glad as I am. But anyway, I hope this will be a help to you today and you'll understand this text better, and there'll be some things we can walk away from it from today with, and that'll help us. Why don't we go ahead and I'll just begin, I guess. Genesis chapter 48, verses 1 through 22. The title of the message today is Jacob Rewards Rachel's Righteous Son. Okay? Jacob rewards Rachel's righteous son. Trying to bring a lot of things that happen in the passage into that. I think I've done that, and I think maybe that will be a helpful way to remember the things that are in this chapter. Jacob rewards Rachel's righteous son. I'd like to go ahead and pray and then read the chapter, and we will begin to make our way through. Heavenly Father, we've gathered together in this room and opened our Bibles to this chapter toward the end of Genesis. And in front of us here on the page are your everlasting words. First, as incredible events which took place and stories that were handed down, and then records that were made and preserved and acknowledged for the sacred writings that they were, translated for us, preserved for us, given to us, read by us. And we ask that chain, at least in our lives, would not stop with the reading, but would end somewhere on down the line as we receive this implanted word, which will yield fruit in our lives on through eternity. So we pray for listening ears and seeing eyes, minds that are alert and attentive, hearts that are open wide, wills that are submitted. We ask for great grace upon our gathering here in these moments. Amen. Genesis chapter 48, we'll read the whole chapter here. After this, Joseph was told, "Behold, your father is ill." So he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And it was told to Jacob, "Your son Joseph has come to you." Then Israel summoned his strength and sat up in bed. And Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me and said to me, 'Behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and I will make of you a company of peoples, and will give this land to your offspring after you for an everlasting possession. And now your two sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are. And the children that you fathered after them shall be yours. They shall be called by the name of their brothers in their inheritance. As for me, when I came from Padan to my sorrow, Rachel died in the land of Canaan on the way, when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath. And I buried her there on the way to Ephrath. That is Bethlehem. When Israel saw Joseph's sons, he said, "Who are these?" Joseph said to his father, "These are my sons, whom God has given me here." And he said, "Bring them to me, please, that I may bless them." Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, so that he could not see. So Joseph brought them near him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see your face, and behold, God has let me see your offspring also." Then Joseph removed them from his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand, toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand, toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near him. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on the head of Manasseh, crossing his hands, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, "The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the boys. And in them let my name be carried on, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth." When Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him, and he took his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, "Not this way, my father, since this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations." So he blessed them that day, saying, "By you Israel will pronounce blessings, saying, God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh." And thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, "Behold, I am about to die, but God will be with you, and will bring you again to the land of your fathers. Moreover, I have given to you, rather than to your brothers, one mountain slope that I took from the hand of the Amorites with my sword and with my bow." All right. It's a curious text. If you've never really, if you've read it, even if you've read it a dozen times, it's still a curious text. And there's some issues in there I feel like it'd be really helpful to work through as we work our way through the text, try to understand it. So we return today to the book of Genesis with just 3 chapters to go. And it was painful to me to leave it off with 3 chapters to go, but that's what we did. There will be more than 3 messages left in the series, I can tell you that, all right? But today we will cover all of chapter 48, Lord willing. As we make this return into Genesis, it seems necessary to me, at least briefly, to reorient ourselves as to where we are in the book in terms of recent history. At this point, Jacob is nearing death on his bed in Egypt. You may remember, if we go back to the end of chapter 47, if you were to look there, beginning in verse, we can start in verse 27. This sounds like a winding down of a man's life. "Thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they gained possessions in it, and were fruitful and multiplied greatly." That is the company of Israel. "And Jacob," that is the man Israel specifically, "lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the days of Jacob, the years of his life, were 147 years. And when the time drew near that Israel must die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, If now I have found favor in your sight, put your hand under my thigh, and promise to deal kindly and truly with me. Do not bury me in Egypt, but let me lie with my fathers. Carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burying place. He answered, I will do as you have said. And he said, Swear to me. And he swore to him. Then Israel bowed himself upon the head of his bed, or of his staff. So we've already come to this place that Israel some time before, some months before, some weeks before, some year, maybe a couple years before, took a turn for the worse the time drew near that he would die. I don't know what that looks like exactly, but it seems like he found himself bedridden, and he didn't get out of that bed except with intense help for the rest of his days, however long that lasted. But when he became bedridden, he began to think about, like, this could be it. And he summoned Joseph to him and made him swear as to what he would do with his. I mean, it's kind of like he wrote out his will, right? I mean, we tend to do that when someone near to us had a funeral. We think, oh, I need to do that. And then 15 years later, we think, I still need to do that, right? This is kind of the way that goes. And so he's done it. He's at least done part of it. He's made his, what do I want done with my body, known to his son Joseph. So Joseph is the executor of the will, in terms at least of that part of things. That's his task. So that's happened already. He's nearing death. But before he dies, he sets his house in order for the final time. So that happened in 47. He said this, what he wants done with his body. But really chapters 48 and 49 is all about, he's taken a worse turn now. Things have gotten even worse. And in his final days, literally his actual final days, what happens? Well, people are sent for. And the family begins to come and to gather. And the first one, evidently, or the first one of significance that we're told about, the first meeting specifically, he may have met with others of his children, but was Joseph. And Joseph comes. So in chapter 48, we read about Joseph visiting his father, and his father uses this unexpected occasion to confer some special honor and blessing upon Joseph. That's the first thing we see in these last three chapters. The second thing we see in chapter 49, we read about a gathering of the entire family of Jacob, or at least all of his sons, for the purpose of prophesying over them and declaring to them he uses these words, what shall happen to them in the days ahead. It's a most unusual chapter, and it ends with Jacob's death. It's more unusual even than this chapter. Then we get to chapter 50. We read about Joseph's reaction to his father dying. And then there's this honored burial in Canaan with all these Egyptian royalty that show up and travel with them. After all of that, we read about the fears of Joseph's brothers. They thought he might try to get revenge on them now that Dad's gone, and maybe his feelings are started to change. And then finally we read about the death of Joseph and what happens to his body after he dies. And then the book of Genesis ends. And it's staggering to think of that, like the way this book began. In the beginning, right? And with the creation of everything, and we got all this, we got the flood, we've got all these things that happen, we've got all these promises made to Abraham and all these things, and then to Isaac, and then to Jacob, and here we are, and then it ends, and they died. And they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin. It's like, and thus, that's how the book ends? Well, you have to remember, Moses wrote 5 books, and he's got to end a book somewhere. He ends this one here, or he stops this writing and considers that a collection of writings. And it makes sense. You have the beginning of everything, all the way up until God began something new with the patriarchs, with Abraham. And you carry that through to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob when they got down to Israel or to Egypt and were settled. And then you stop. Then you have a period, and then Exodus begins, and in that book, he quickly summarizes nearly 400 years of their history in Egypt and starts afresh, begin narrating in great detail events that are happening at that time. So it makes sense to stop here. But it's an odd place to just kind of end a book in some sense. So today then we're considering Genesis 48, and we'll consider the whole chapter. But so that's kind of what's happening at the end of Genesis. Now again, to reorient ourselves as to what's happening and get ourselves in the right frame of mind. A very quick review. First, we've got to remember that Jacob, before he had children, had received a promise from God that his children would enjoy the blessings of God as a people or as a united company. In Genesis chapter 28, Genesis chapter 28, verses 3 and 4. This is he's getting ready to leave to go to Padan Aram. He's fleeing from his brother. And we read in verses 3 and 4, this is Isaac's blessing of Jacob. And he says, God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may become a company of peoples. May He give the blessing of Abraham to you and to your offspring with you, that you may take possession of the land of your sojournings that God gave to Abraham. That's the way it's written. And I remember when we went through it at the time, I was saying, and I made a big deal of it even when we started Jacob's story, that this idea that his children will all be together with him, inheriting and enjoying some of these blessings and the process of what God is doing. And it doesn't look very likely as the things begin, all the tensions. But you'll notice in Genesis chapter 48, Jacob says, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me and said to me, Behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and will make of you a company of peoples. A company of peoples. Not just many nations, one over here, one over there, but a company of peoples altogether. And so this was loomed large in his mind, and it's on his mind in this chapter. But so that is there. This promise that they'll receive the blessings of Abraham, that they will receive it as a company of people, that they will have the land, right? And he'll have these descendants. They'll be fruitful. It will be a large people. All of that is all together. This is important. Now this man, Jacob, had 12 sons in a most bizarre fashion, with 2 primary wives and 2 secondary wives, but only one loved wife. Don't try this at home, right? This is what we mean. But this is what happened. He didn't ask for this, right? Laban lied to him and deceived him. But it was his life, and he lived it for a long time. Now, of those 12 sons from 4 women, one was the favorite son of the father Jacob. And it wasn't even close. He was the not only was he so let's say this. What about this son? He was the polar opposite of his brothers, or at least all of his older brothers. He was diligent, he was faithful, he was honest, and perhaps most of all, most importantly, he was Rachel's son, the firstborn child of the wife that he loved. Rachel dies in giving birth to Joseph's younger son, Benjamin. And then not long after that, when about 17 years old, Joseph was shown in multiple visions from God that he would rule over his family. First his brothers and then his entire family. And his brothers hated him on account of these dreams. They tried to kill him, but then they had another thought. They realized they could make some money if they would sell him as a slave instead of killing him. So they did that. Jacob, their father, is led to believe by the sons that Joseph has been killed by a wild animal. And so Jacob then mourns the death of his son from that time forward for the rest of his days. Meanwhile, Joseph is brought down to Egypt and sold as a slave. The man who bought him is the captain of Pharaoh's guard and the keeper of Pharaoh's prison. And through a very winding road of being recognized for his good service, being exalted to an authoritative position of service, then being mistreated, lied about, forgotten, Joseph finds himself eventually as a prisoner in that prison, though he does enjoy certain privileges due to his honest and dutiful manner of serving. But he's still a prisoner. A slave who became a prisoner. That's what he is. But these years have been full of trial and heartache for him. Eventually, through a dream sent to Pharaoh by God, Joseph is called for by the king to interpret a dream. And then, as a result of the interpretation, to serve as Pharaoh's right hand over all of Egypt. Then there comes this severe regional famine, and because of that famine, Joseph's brothers make their way to Egypt, where Joseph has stored up food against the famine to prepare for it. There, these brothers unwittingly do in fact bow to their now ruling brother and submit to him. He recognizes them, but they do not recognize him. He puts them through a whole series of tests to discern what they're made of now, after these many years, and also to confront them with their past while still concealing his own identity from them at the present time. Eventually, he can see that his brothers have changed, that they are genuinely contrite for their previous sins, and he reveals himself to them and sends for his father so that the whole family can take refuge in the shadow of his protection and his provision in Egypt, now that he's been exalted. God has sent him down to Egypt in these circumstances in order to unite the family together and to protect and provide for the family in Egypt before they will eventually, many years from now, return to the land promised them by God. As the famine goes on, the people of Israel gain wealth and status and position for the sake of Joseph's good service, as like a reward for Joseph, as a way to honor Joseph and all that he's done for Egypt. The Egyptians, meanwhile, as part of the Egyptian system, find them and answerable to Pharaoh, find themselves answering to Egyptian authorities and dealing with them. And under Joseph's plan, they are saved from death, but the whole famine is so severe that it costs them dearly, and they make it through the famine with little but their lives. Some 12 years after the famine is ended, our chapter today opens up. Now at the end of his life, Jacob is weak and has now taken a turn for the worst. Genesis chapter 48, I think, could be divided easily into three sections. Verses 1 through 7, 8 through 16, 17 through 22. And here's what I'll say. Each one of these I divide into two subsections. First, Joseph visits his father, verses 1 through 7. In verses 1 and 2, we're kind of given the setting for the whole chapter. In verses 3 through 7, we read about Jacob's speech to Joseph and this significant honor that's given to Joseph by his father at the time. The second section, you can think of, it's still the same meeting, but now it's primarily about Ephraim and Manasseh before Jacob and what Jacob does with them, verses 8 through 16. In verses 8 through 11, we read about Jacob he begins sort of this ceremony of blessing his grandchildren. And there's some confusion here, I would say, or possibly he's just overcome with joyful emotion. We'll get to what's maybe confusing about that, but it's kind of a preamble. Either the ceremony begins, or it hasn't quite begun in earnest yet, and that'll happen in a minute. There's some confusion there, and we'll talk about that. It will help clarify some details for us. Then in verses 12 through 16, Jacob makes his blessing upon these sons. Really, he blesses Joseph, is what it says. He blesses Joseph. But the words he speaks are a reference to his sons. And then in verses 17 through 22, the third section, Jacob rejects Joseph's correction, right? Joseph tries to correct him. He rejects that correction and once more confers a final honor upon Joseph. So he says, no, I don't need your correction. Thank you very much. And by the way, here's one more honor I want to give to you. That's the last section, 17 through 20. Joseph tries to correct his father, but Jacob needed no correction and refuses. And then in verses 21 through 22, as the chapter ends, Joseph is given one last honor by Jacob rather than to his brothers. Jacob has something he's going to give to someone, and he says, I'm giving this to you rather than to your brothers. It's a very curious way of stating it. So that's the outline. And we'll just begin to dive in then, considering the scene here at the beginning, verses 1 and 2. After this, Joseph was told, behold, your father is ill. So he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And it was told to Jacob, your son Joseph has come to you. Then Israel summoned his strength and sat up in bed. Okay, what do we want to say here? It seems to me as I read this, and I hope it seems that way to you too, that evidently Joseph has remained in Pharaoh's service. That seems obvious. Long after the famine has ended. We're 12 years out because he dies here like in the next chapter, and there's no time that it takes place other than maybe a day or two between now and then. And He lives here for 17 years. When he got there, Joseph said there's 5 years left of the famine. So if there's 17 years minus the 5 years of the famine, that means it's 12 years since the famine's ended. And so that's, in our culture, we'd call that ancient history, right? But for them, it's recent. But so this is what's happened. And it's 12 years later, and he's not with his family. He's over here serving Pharaoh. They're in Goshen, not far, but it's a way, you got to travel. You'd be glad if you got a horse, right, or a chariot. You don't want to walk it if you can avoid it. It's a ways out there. And so he took this turn for the worse. He's really ill. They send, right? Joseph was told, your father is ill. So he took with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and it was told to Jacob, your son Joseph has come to you. So word was sent, and then he comes back. So it appears that Joseph is still in high office. We don't know if he had this exact same high authority. Sometimes, a king can designate authority for a certain task. You might be in charge of everything until this is done, and then you're not in that position anymore. That may well have been true for Joseph, that he was not second in command anymore. But you can be sure, by the way Jacob is honored later, that if he didn't have the same authority anymore, he still traded in terms of respect and honor in Egypt. He had a name and a measure of respect and appreciation that was unmatched. And just on that name alone, he could probably do whatever he wanted in Egypt. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And so he maintained this level of respect and exchanged that currency mostly, at least. And he may have still had this high position. Upon hearing of his father's turn for the worse, Joseph visits his father in Goshen and takes with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. It's a little bit unclear whether he has yet had any sons, any other children at this point, and that we'll get to a translation issue later in the text. But he takes with him these 2 sons. These sons, I'm going to throw you for a loop here in a minute. Well, I don't want to do that yet. Because for effect, I need to do it later. Okay. So he takes with him these 2 boys. Joseph certainly is bringing his sons with him, much like we do when word comes to us that a dear relative or is on their deathbed, right? You hear that, grandma's dying. What do? Right? We did this in our family when my grandfather was dying. Just the last, right? Remember, we all went to the hospital and we're all there in this room, and thankfully, it was a huge room. And most of his descendants were in that room. Almost all of them. It was amazing. And we're all there with him as he's in his dying moments. And we're in the room when he passed. Got to speak to him or hug him or make some gesture, right? Because he mattered to us and we wanted to be there. And so this is what Joseph does. He's going to leave and he says, Ephraim, Manasseh, or he says, Manasseh, Ephraim, come with me. And they come with him and he travels. The order of their names is important, right? The Bible doesn't do these things by mistake. This is their birth order, Manasseh and then Ephraim. You'll notice some subtleties in a moment when Jacob says Ephraim and Manasseh. It's like he was already planning to do the switch before he did it, He just wasn't coming out with it, and Joseph didn't pick up on it. So they go to visit. Upon his arrival, Joseph is told that Joseph has come to see him. It does not appear then to me that Jacob sent for Joseph. Right? And that's pretty typical. Like if you have a loved one and you're caring for them and they take a turn for the worse, like they've been really bad and now it's really bad, you don't say, hey, you're doing really bad. Like, I think you're going to die. What should I do? And they say, well, send for everyone. That can happen sometimes, but typically, as the caregiver, you just recognize it and you just say, people, listen, hey, we go send word, family needs to gather. And you just keep doing all you can to keep this person encouraged to stay alive till they all get here, right? But there's sometimes when the person knows and maybe they give the direction. It seems like Jacob is a bit surprised, like he's not shocked or anything. He's glad to see his son, but he didn't know he was coming. That's just my reading of it. So it seems like news came to Joseph, perhaps without Jacob knowing it. Often the case with those who are dying. But look at this man. He's so frail. it was told to Jacob, your son Joseph has come to you. Then Israel summoned his strength and sat up in bed. Like, what? People get to that place, right? Right? We see that they get so weak, and sometimes it happens quick, and there's just no strength. He summoned his strength. He gathered his strength. He made efforts to sit up in bed. Probably, if it's that hard for you, he's laying down, and it's, you can hear the groans and the pain and everything else, the agony, as they pillow him up in bed to be upright. Legs out in front of him in bed, sitting there. Now he's up, right? This is the situation. Or perhaps, because it is summoning his strength, maybe it's he gets up all the way up out of bed and leans over and sits on the side of the bed, leaning maybe on a staff, holding it to talk. Maybe. Something like that. But this man is frail. He had to exert himself just to get up in bed. Again, I think probably pillowed up on the bed with his legs out in front of him, but maybe sitting on the edge of his bed. And then, so that's the scene. And then in verses 3 through 7, we read his speech. And he gives the logic of his decision to bless Joseph in this way. So let's read. He gives this announcement. And Jacob said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and blessed me, and said to me, Behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and I will make of you a company of peoples, and will give this land to your offspring after you as an everlasting possession. Consideration number 1. Why am I doing this? What's my thinking here? Number 1, the promises of God concerning our future. He doesn't say, I want you to know that that God has done this. He made some promises to me. Let me tell you what God did to me. He did for me. He says, look, God promised me that He would do this for us. That's number 1. I want to bless you because God's promised us something. Consideration number 2, the necessity of being united. Right? That's in there again. He says, and will make of you a company of peoples, and will give this land to your offspring after you for an everlasting possession. They're going to do this all together. They're supposed to be united. That's in his head. He's thinking of that. Number 3 is he looks upon Joseph and he remembers Joseph's goodness and his righteousness, his character, and his suffering that he undergoed have all been the necessary instrument through which the promises are coming to pass. Why give a blessing specifically to Joseph? Because Joseph is the one who brought all this about under God. If Joseph hadn't suffered all this time, if Joseph hadn't ruled the way that he ruled, hadn't been the kind of man he was, if he'd been anything like any of his brothers, we would never have gotten to this place. That's why you want to bless Joseph. And now your 2 sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are, just as my oldest sons are. Like they will be on equal ground with them, just like them. And the children that you fathered after them shall be yours, or the children that you will father, or that you father. Whatever children you have after them will be yours. But they shall be called by the name of their brothers, namely Ephraim and Manasseh, for purposes of inheritance and all those things, right, in their inheritance. And then he gives us this 4th consideration. As for me, when I came from Paddan, to my sorrow, Rachel died in the land of Canaan on the way, when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath. And I buried her there on the way to Ephrath. That is Bethlehem. What does that have to do with this? Like when you just read this, it's like, and? It's like, son, I want to bless you. there's all these promises from God concerning our future. We had to be together, and you were the means through which that happened. And I want to bless you. And your mom died, and I had to bury her just on the road. So what? Well, I think the idea there is this. Don't forget about all the love that Jacob had for Joseph. The idea is, the connection is this. I don't want to fail to honor another person who has meant so very much to me in this life. And I couldn't do anything about it when Rachel died. There wasn't the weather, the heat, the dry land, where we were, the necessity we had to get to where we were going, the distance that yet remained. We couldn't do anything for her, but just bury her by the side of the road in a marked grave that wouldn't last. The markings wouldn't even last. It's like, what are we going to do? And it tore me up inside to have to do that. And it still eats at me. And I'm not going to fail to do that again. Like, you have so blessed us, Joseph. I want to honor you. You deserve to be honored. And I failed to do that with your mother, but I won't fail to do that with you. I think that's the necessary connection, why this is brought up. Therefore, because of those four things, because of God's promise concerning our future, and the necessity that we all be united to enjoy it, and the fact that that would never happen apart from your suffering that you endured, and the way God worked through all that, and your righteous character in all these situations you've been in, and the way you've forgiven and just blessed us, and the fact that I did fail to honor your mother, I am determined I'm going to bless you in this way. As unusual as it is what I'm going to do, I won't be dissuaded from doing it. I am going to give you a double portion among your brothers. And he does it in a curious way. Like, the double portion would be your inheritance. Everyone, so there's 12 brothers, so you divide all of his belongings up in 12. But typically you divide it into 13 because the eldest would get the double portion. So there's going to be 13 divisions of it. Well, now he says, check that, 14. You're going to get 2, and then some other, whoever is going to be recognized as the oldest brother, getting the double portion, they're going to get it too. But you're going to get a double portion as well. There'll be 2 of you that get double portions. Okay. But then the way he does it is he's got 2 boys that were born during this time, and he says, I'm going to make them mine. I'm going to adopt them for purposes of inheritance, and so that they're going to receive just as much as all the other brothers do. It's interesting. They're still your sons, and I still only have 12, but for this purpose, they're going to be honored in this way, and they'll be recognized that way. And perpetually, they'll have this name. They shall be mine. It's a very interesting decision to be made. And so this Joseph is just surprised with this. There it is. So then, what happens next? The beginning of the ceremony, or a moment of caution, or joyful surprise? We'll find out. Okay? Verses 8 through 11. When Israel saw Joseph's sons, he said, "Who are these?" And Joseph said to his father, "They are my sons, whom God has given me here." And he said, "Bring them to me, please, that I may bless them." Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, so that he could not see. So Joseph brought them near him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, "I never expected to see your face, and behold, God has let me see your offspring also." This is can be confusing portion, or easily misunderstood. First of all, what does he mean when he says, when Israel saw Joseph's sons, he said, "Who are these?" Because in verse 10 it says he couldn't see. When he saw his sons, he said, "Who are these?" And it's like, well, now he couldn't see, so we had to help him out because he couldn't see anything. It's like, so, a couple different ways. It could be the beginning of the ceremony, that he knows they're there and he knows who they are already. But he says, "And who are these?" Right? Who gives this woman away to be married to this man? It's not like, who would this be? It's like, you know who it's going to be. It's going to be the dad or whoever's in charge of the woman, whoever she is asked. They're standing right there, her mother and I. And nobody says, I'm surprised, or like, I didn't know. Like, who this is, right? Sometimes in other church traditions, they'll have like a baby, like an infant baptism and stuff, and they'll say like, who is presented, or what name is this child given? And you already know the name, but they declare the name, right? And that kind of thing at a christening and stuff. So it could be that sort of a thing, right? And who are these? And the answer, and it would make sense because the answer comes back, they are my sons whom God has given me here. Just in language, just like he had said, I'm going to, for Ephraim and Manasseh, whom God had given to you here before I came, these are my sons whom God has given me. They're the ones. It's all official. We're saying it in such a way that our language corresponds to each other so that the ceremony kind of works. It's all official. It's very possible. But to me, then it seems odd. And he said, okay, so then you would have the next part of the ceremony, and bring them to me, please, that I may bless them. All that seems official. Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, so that he could not see, so Joseph brought them near him, and he kissed them and embraced them. That doesn't seem to be likely part of the ceremony. I mean, it could be, but even the language there, typically it would be, and he embraced them, and then he kissed them. Like terms of endearment, he embraced them, held them close, and he kissed them, and then he pronounced the blessing. But here it says he kissed them and he embraced them. It's like probably embraced them first, then kissed them, but then just held on. These boys, they're so precious to me. It doesn't feel like a ceremony, this part of it, as I read it. So how else might we be able to read it? Well, one thing that comes to mind, a bit humorous, is remember, he had a father who also couldn't see and tried to go bless his boys in a certain way, and he was tricked. He was like, who are they? Like, because I mentioned these guys, I want to make sure who's who, right? So that's very possible. And it does seem that he very much wanted to know which one was which, because he had something he wanted to do that was going to throw it all off, right? So just there's that hint of caution there, so because he's in a I'm sure when he duped his father, he never thought he would be in a position many years from now where he's blind and he's trying to properly bless his children, and he can't do it without help. So there's that. Maybe a word of caution. The other thought is just joyful surprise. He's there. His son came to him. Hey, people have been coming around. Like, it's Joseph. And he does all he can to get up, and Joseph comes in, and he can't see, but he hears Joseph, and he's talking with Joseph, and there's two figures that are there. And he doesn't know who they are. Who's with you? Well, these are them. What? Bring them to me right now. And they come, and he kisses them, and he embraces them, and he says, well, let's do this now. And they just do it. I think that's the way I tend to read it. And so you have this sort of a situation. I don't insist that it's the beginning of the ceremony or that it's joyful surprise, but you could kind of read it, I think, either way. There are elements of both things there. Ultimately, it's not going to determine how you interpret all the rest of it, but just how do you interpret these verses? So bring them to me, please, that I may, what he says, bring them to me, please, that I may bless them. That I may bless them. But if you'll turn later, verse 15, and he blessed Joseph and said, who's he blessing? Them or Joseph? This is what I mean in that by the title that this is a reward for Rachel's righteous son. It's a reward. This is a reward for Joseph. He's not just wanting to bless his boys just to bless his boys. He's blessing Joseph, and he's honoring Joseph in this way. Let me bless these sons of yours with this honor that I'm going to give them. And so this is what he does. So then they're brought near, right? So it says, so Joseph brought them near him. This is verse 10. Joseph brought them near him, and he kissed them and embraced them, right? Because his eyes were dim. So he couldn't see, but he can't see hardly anything. And Joseph brings them near He kisses and he embraces. And then Israel said to Joseph, I never expected to see your face. And behold, God has let me see your offspring also. Which we can interpret a number of ways. We could think, well, back there in Canaan, he never thought he would ever see a son again. Certainly true. Fair enough. And now I've not only seen you, I've seen your offspring. I cannot believe that for 17 years he's been in Egypt and he's never seen Ephraim and Manasseh. I just don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. There's no way. So I don't think that's what it means. I want to interpret it in terms of recent history. He took a turn for the worse. He called for Joseph. Joseph came. He gave him directions about what to do. Then it's gotten really bad here recently. And he's like blind, basically. The boys draw near and he sees them. And I don't mean to say it's a miracle, his eyes were healed. But something like there are people even in our church, right? I won't want to mention them by name because they're just recordings and stuff, but whose vision comes and goes a bit, right? Sometimes that's due to medical treatment, sometimes that's just anyway. My grandmother is very bad in her vision now, but even then it would at times come and go. She had seasons where she could see a little better than others, right? It wasn't just on a steady decline. Sometimes it was a little bit better. His health is terribly bad. He didn't think he was going to pull through the night last night, maybe, or whatever. There's all kinds of reasons. Someone with as poor of health as him and as bad of eyes as him, and then there's the distance between he and his son, distant physical distance, that he thought he would never, ever see him again. And so this is what he says. He comes and it's like, lo and behold, his boy shows up, traveled the distance, he made it through the night, he's alive, he's here, they're having a conversation, and it's one of these days where he's got a little more strength than he's had lately, he's doing better, and it's a good day for his vision, like it's been good here lately, and he can actually not just know they're in the room and feel them, but he can see them. He says, I did not expect this. God has been so kind. He did not expect this at all. His fast failing health, his poor vision, the distance of travel for Joseph, Joseph's responsibilities in Egypt. He got away, he made this meeting happen, and he's able to see not just Joseph, but to his surprise, the boys are there with him, and he gets to see them too. When they're brought near, he can make out who they are. So Joseph brought them near him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, I never expected to see your face, and behold, God has let me see your offspring also. What a thing. The next section then. Joseph, I think, kind of prepares and helps how he can. And then Jacob blesses Joseph by blessing his sons. Then Joseph removed them from his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. Now, how do you read this? I, for the longest time, have read this, okay. You just think, like, here's the scene, these boys, like, kind of thinking, and who are they? Like, he doesn't know who they are. He's never met them before or something like, and who are these? Well, these are my sons. Manasseh and Ephraim. Young lads, young boys, here they are. Right? And he goes, okay, and then either Joseph puts them on his own knees, he's got them on his knees, and they're kind of there with his dad, or he sets them on the bed on his dad's knees, and the little boys are there with their toy, or whatever, right? No clueless as to what's happening, these little kids. Or he's sitting on the edge of his bed and he's bouncing the kids on his knees or something. And then at this point, Joseph then takes the boys off his knees and sets them down for this more official part of the ceremony. But these men are like 20. They were born to Joseph before Jacob got to Egypt. Jacob was been to Egypt for 17 years. So at the least, they're like the youngest one could be 18. They're probably in their early 20s. He's not bouncing them on their knee. They're not sitting on Joseph's knees. They're full-grown men. He doesn't know who they are because they could be any man. If he can't see them, they're just these big guys. They're the ones wants working his field. They're not these little kids. So it can't, and he's so frail, he's got to summon his strength to get up in bed. You don't sit on that man's legs and say, hey, like, you're going to kill him. So taking them from his knees, I think, is something like this. he's pillowed up in his bed. His legs are out there in front of him. And when he brings them near, when he says, well, bring him to me, they just come and they sit down on the bed right there next to his knees. One probably facing this way, kind of looking at him, sits down on the bed this way to look at him. The other way looking at him. Here he is, and he's there, and he sees them both, and he hugs the one, and then he hugs the other, and the scene is this way, where they're just on the bed. Or he's on the side of the bed, and they come and they stand right there, and he just hugs on them and kisses these boys and hugs them. And this is what he does. And then it's okay, Joseph knows he's being honored in this way. He says, okay, now that's done. And he grabs his boys and he pulls them back. And Joseph then removed them from his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. Joseph just bows. He's ruler of Egypt. He just bows to his father. What a thing. All the power that he has, but he still honors his father. What a thing. So, and then what does he do? Then he took them both, Ephraim in his right hand, approaching his father, to his father's left hand. And then Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near him. Right? Why? What's all this right and left stuff about? Okay, it's not a huge deal to us, but we still use those terms a little bit. I want to turn to two passages real quick, which I think will just, in a colorful way, kind of illustrate this. The first one is Ezekiel chapter 4 and verse 4. Speaking of the we won't do that one. I don't want to do that one because of the way it's said later. So we'll just do Ecclesiastes 10. How about that? Ecclesiastes 10. Ecclesiastes chapter 10 and verse 2. A wise man's heart inclines him to the right, but a fool's heart to the left, right? Or for you guys, to the right, to the left, right? So, what, a wise man is to the right, a fool's heart's to the left? I mean, it's just implicit. You understand right is good, left is bad, and it's kind of the pejorative term. Like, it's at least second best, right? It's certainly not good, right? So, you've got best and maybe least best, right? You could say it that way, least best. So this is the way it is. So both men are going to receive a blessing, but one who gets the right hand, that's a far superior blessing, just because it's the right hand. And so he brings them, the oldest to the right hand and the youngest to the left hand, because that's the way you would do it. He's not trying to outwit his dad or anything. He's just, like, this is traditionally what you would do. The oldest would be blessed in this way. And so in the blessing, I just want to say the right hand and the left hand matter in and of themselves. They have symbolic significance to them that they might not to us. They really matter to them. Great meaning at this point. And so what does he do? Well, so it says, verse 12. Then Joseph removed them from his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near him. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, right? And his left hand on the head of Manasseh, crossing his hands, for Manasseh was firstborn. Right? He just kind of, so you can imagine, like, is he trying to keep his smile in or something whenever Joseph brings up, he says, now I've brought Manasseh here. This is Manasseh, okay. And this is Ephraim's, okay. He knows what he's getting ready to do. He's just like, and all of a sudden he starts pronouncing the blessing, right? It's so humorous to think about this old man. He's still wily. He's ornery still, and he didn't tell him, like, no, switch them sides, and I want to bless them differently and argue for it. He's just like, okay, whatever. I guess I'll switch my hands, Like, all this, you're being so careful in this, and I appreciate you trying to make sure this is done right, but I have a certain way I want to do this, and you're going to be surprised. So he does this, and he blessed, and it said, but he did this, and he says, and he blessed Joseph. So he's blessing Joseph. The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the boys, and in them let my name be carried on, in the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. Same blessing. He didn't say, I'm going to give this blessing here, and then I got a different blessing over here. That happened with Jacob and Esau. Like, they were very different kinds of things, right? And so, don't you have a blessing for me? It's like, sorry. And away from the fatness of the earth, away from, it's like very different sorts of blessings. Well, this was the same words, but because of who the right hand was on, it's just kind of understood. They kind of get more of it. It's more. There's a greater intensity. Maybe they kind of get a double portion of the blessing. It's more surely upon them. There's a greater emphasis, right? Both names are written, but only one was underlined. That's that kind of idea. And so that's what he does. But it's the same words. But notice what he says. The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked. He said, my grandfather and my father walked before God. And it doesn't say, and the God before whom I walked. When it comes to his own life, now, he wouldn't have been wrong to do that, but he puts all the emphasis on what God has done for him. I lived and I saw my father Abraham's son, and I saw him walk before God. And stories were told to me, and they've been passed on to you about the way he walked with God. And Isaac himself, some of what he did in his life and the way he walked with God and how he lived before his God. And I've been your father, and you know me, and I want to tell you what God has done for me. His testimony is about not what he's done for God and the way he's lived in a righteous way, but what God has done for him. And he says, so this God before whom they walked, and then secondly, the God who's been my shepherd all my life, and thirdly, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil. And you think, why are we, what, an angel? Well, there has been several times where he's met up with, he saw, God spoke to him, an angel appeared to him in a vision and said these things. He met an angel for this, he met an angel for that. It's probable that that it was an angel that he wrestled with that night, although it's not. Actually, Hosea tells us that. You don't get that from Genesis, but in Hosea, it tells us that. So, an angel. The angel has redeemed me from all evil. Theologically, there's questions about who that angel is. I'm not going to get into that now. But he's kind of summoning all his experience with God, all the ways that God has blessed him, all the avenues that has come, and he's saying, what I want is, I'm asking God in all of those ways to bless these boys, right? Everything that God has ever done for me, everything I've ever seen God do for another, I'm asking God, bless these boys. In full remembrance of that, in recognition of that, please let these boys possess that. Bless the boys. And in them let my name be carried on, in the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac. He is not here separating Ephraim and Manasseh from the rest of his children and saying, only let them have the name. He's rather, his name will be passed on among his descendants. But he doesn't want it to be Joseph. He wants it to be Joseph's boys that are there and remembered. That they would have their own tribes among themselves. You see, he's aware of the promises of God, and there's going to be a company of peoples. They're going to go back in the land. He's not making these statements saying, as just a father thinking about the next generation. He's thinking 400 or 500 years into the future, 1,000 years into the future. What's this going to look like? This is what I want. Because he's got these promises from God, and he's acting accordingly. So, it's quite a thing. In them let my name be carried on, in the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. Now, there is an unneeded and an unwanted correction here. Verses 17 through 20. When Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him, and he took his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, "Not this way, father, since this one is the firstborn, put your right hand on his head." But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations." So he blessed them that day. Right? So we'll go on here in a second, but I think we're given a hint here also of Jacob's real frailty at this point. The fact that Joseph, he can't see, Joseph does all this, and then the old man's sitting up in bed, and he goes and he tells him, "I've got this one here, and I got this one here." It's okay, and then he does this, and it's like, it's as if Joseph's like, "Dad, no, like you forgot. Like I know you, like you don't understand. You did it wrong. Like this hand goes here, and you need to now say it again, but you need to pronounce it." And it's like, "No. I know that. I know I switched it, but that's what I wanted." Right? But at first he's just thinking, "Dad, what in the world? He can't do anything. He is gonna die soon. He can't even remember which one I told him just a second ago was here, and he's switching it up. I did this so it'd be easy for him to do it. Now he's gonna fall over, and it's like you just imagine the situation, and it's like, no, I get that, I know, but I just think it's just another indicator of as you think of the situation, how frail he must be. That Joseph's assumption is that he forgot, he'd messed it up. He's in bad health. But the correction was unneeded. He was very aware of what he was doing, and it was unwanted. Right? Joseph is not the kind of son who'll just say, "Dad's doing something I don't like. No, Dad, do it this way. Do it the way I'm telling you." He just got done bowing in front of him. He just thinks he just messed it up. It's displeasing. Like, "Dad, no, we can't let that go. Like you did it on the wrong one. Manasseh, he's the firstborn. Let's do it again. Let's do it right." And he says, "No, I knew what I did. That was intended." What a thing. So the previous blessing in verses 15 and 16, when he pronounced that blessing with his hands that way, he says he blessed Joseph and said, and look at verse 16, "Bless the boys, and in them let my name be carried on, in the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow." The boys are there with his hands upon the boys, but he's not speaking to the boys. He's blessing Joseph, pleading with God that God would bless these people, them. But now, when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him, and he took his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, "Not this way, father, since this one is the firstborn, put your right hand on his head." But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He also shall be a people." They're still talking about them, right, in the third person. "And he shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations." So he's explaining why he did that. "And so he blessed them that day, saying," now to the boys, "By you Israel will pronounce blessing, saying, God make you as Ephraim and Manasseh." So now he blesses them directly, right? So he switched it like this, and now he's got his hands down. He said, "I know, this is why I did it. And now, by you two men, Israel is going to pronounce blessings. May God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh." Right? And then it says, "Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh." And we all know that. We all say it that way. We read it that way all the time and through the rest of the Bible. Ephraim and Manasseh, not Manasseh and Ephraim. And that's because of this switch. In this, and even in the saying, "By you Israel will pronounce blessing." So you're an Israelite, and you want to say, "I hope it goes well for you. May God bless you." You don't say that. I mean, you could say that, but what you're supposed to say is, "May God make you as Ephraim and Manasseh." Right? It would be a little strange. Like, I have a brother who's a younger brother, and everyone who knew our family growing up, it was Chad and Scott. Now, people who know my brother only and then meet me, it's Scott and Chad. I understand that. But if all the people that knew us, like who knew our family all the time, just started saying like, "May the Lord make you like Scott and Chad," I'd be like, well, why are we switching it? It's Chad and Scott. Like, what are you talking about? Right? I want first billing. I've always had it. I've always enjoyed that. Right? Not really. I'm just saying. But this is this kind of thing. It's forever. It's switched. He doesn't say Israel will pronounce blessings, saying, "May God make you as Manasseh and Ephraim." And you could imagine if he had done that, Joseph would say, "Oh, well, okay, it works out." He gets the blessing, but the way that people pronounce it and say it, he is still first. Like, no, he put one before the other, and he really did. Thus, in doing that, in the switching, in the explanation, and in the blessing that he gave upon the actual boys themselves when he blessed them, in all those ways, he switched it. He put Ephraim before Manasseh. And we're never told why. That's the other thing that's bizarre. Like in all these other instances, like I can tell you why Cain was passed over. That's obvious. I know why Esau didn't get the birthright. Right? These things are clear. There's always a reason. But here it's just because he wanted to. An old man's prerogative. It's in the will. That's why. And it's a strange thing. And he wanted to make it a saying in Israel, among the nation, forever. To remember the switch. It's like my one last act that no one expected. Like look at that. It's a strange thing. But it couldn't be more serious in terms of what he's passing on. And there's one final reward then in the chapter for Joseph. Then Israel said to Joseph, "Behold, I am about to die, but God will be with you." Right? I'm going to die. Like God's done these things. God has shepherded me all this time, and I'm going to die. But listen, God's going to be with you. This will continue. And will bring you again. So it's not just be with you, Joseph. Be with you, Joseph, with Ephraim and with Manasseh, with the whole company of peoples. God will be with you. And will bring you again to the land of your fathers. What's more, moreover, I have given to you, rather than to your brothers, one mountain slope that I took from the hand of the Amorites with my sword and with my bow. Okay. Does anyone have a different, I'm not asking for a footnote, but anyone have a different translation other than one mountain slope? Okay, one portion more. That's curious. So it could be one portion of the land. So as I understand it, the Hebrew word there, Shechem, sounds an awful lot like this town, Shechem, right? This region, this district, where Israel had some sons go in and in revenge, murder and wipe out a whole town, which they took by their sword and their bow. And if that's the place, so it may be that it's just this kind of this area, this mountain slope, this portion of land here, I'm going to give it to you. Because it meant to me, because even though it's not recorded for us elsewhere in Genesis, he at some point had some battle, and he took this place. And he's going to give it. Specifically, that place to someone. It's like the only thing he ever really had there. And he wants to give it to Joseph and his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and not to the rest of them. Maybe. Or maybe, like we'd said whenever we taught through that portion a long time ago, that maybe it doesn't seem like Joseph's the kind of guy who would have taken part in that to the degree the others did. And some of his brothers were singled out for their leading involvement in it. But it may be that it is Shechem, the actual place that we know by Shechem, and it may that we've read about already. And it may be that look, this was taken when he says which I took from the hand of the Amorites with my sword and my bow, meaning not me, but me as in terms of the collective, like my family, which I took. They don't get to have it. Like the way that they slayed those people and took them, there was nothing righteous about it. When you guys all get the land and you take it all over, that Shechem belongs to your descendants, Joseph. Nobody else can have it. I give it to you, he says, rather than to your brothers. It's such a curious statement. I give it to you rather than to them. Why can't they have it? It could be, again, just this place that he had taken, and he's going to give it. He's always had in his heart to pass it on to someone. And because of all that Joseph has endured to make all this possible, he wants to reward him with something. And what could he give him? Well, I could give you a perpetual gift. I could give you this place in the land. When you go back there, it'll belong to you guys. And they can't have it because of you were the one who suffered and made all this possible. You were the one, Joseph. Could be. I think however we understand it, that is certainly true. But it could be more than that. It could be the city of Shechem, and the rather than your brothers is meant as a judgment upon them. In the next chapter, he brings these things up. They're on his mind. It's also helpful to know that when Israel did inherit the land, Shechem is smack dab in the middle of Manasseh. So they did get Shechem. So wherever this place is, we know that they got it. Either Ephraim or Manasseh got it. So it's got to be somewhere in this area. And since the city of Shechem is there, it just seems like a very plausible answer to this riddle that we find there, trying to figure out what this place could be. So that's why I think maybe that location. I think Shechem might really be Shechem. That doesn't have to be. Okay, so what do we do with all this? There's a lot of things going on in this chapter. The one thing I thought that runs right through the whole thing is this idea that it is right to honor those whom God has used to bless us and provide for us. I'll say that again. It's right to honor those who God has used to bless us and provide for us, especially when it has involved their suffering or difficulties for them, and especially when they have shown strength of character and faith in God in order to bless us. That's the situation Jacob finds himself in. God had promised him all these things were supposed to happen, but the only way any of them happened and were made possible, humanly speaking, was because of Joseph's suffering, Joseph's righteous character, his continued faith in God as the Word of God was testing him all that time, that made it possible. And now comes to the end of his days, and it's right and it's fitting to honor him. And he gives reasons for why he wants to honor him. And one of the reasons he gives is that he wasn't able to honor Rachel like she deserved. And so he's going to set this right. He doesn't have a clean conscience about what happened with Rachel. And so here he is, and he's not going to go to his grave having not done this. He needs to honor his son, and he honors him. And I just say, we're not told specifically commanded to honor, or there's no command in here in this chapter, but there's an example. And there are some other commands in Scripture along these lines I just want to point out, and I think will be helpful just to remember. 1 Timothy chapter 5, right, verse 17, very famous text, very well known because preaching is so common. 1 Peter 5:17, let the elders who rule well be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in preaching and teaching. There's a command given, right? Paul commanding Timothy, listen, you're going out in these churches, we're establishing them, make sure that when they're ordered, they're set up and structured in such a way that the people they would honor these elders who rule well, especially those who labor in preaching and teaching. They'd make recompense to them. They would in some way, not recompense, but they'd remunerate them with honor. And then how about 3 John? The text that really comes to mind, 3 John verses 5 through 8. Beloved, is the faithful thing you do in all of your efforts for these brothers, strangers as they are, who testified to your love before the church. You will do well to send them on their journey in a manner worthy of God, for they have gone out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Therefore we ought to support people like these, that we may be fellow workers for the truth. Missionaries. You're a Christian, and you meet a missionary. They come through, and you see that they have some needs. You should honor them, love them, support them, encourage them, send them on their way in a manner worthy of God. It's right to honor those who God has used to bless us and provide for us, especially when it involves their suffering and their difficulty. He mentions here, look, you want to send them on their journey in a manner worthy of God because they've gone out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing. They're suffering out there as they go. They're doing without. Therefore, we should support these people, that we can be workers with them. Join in the effort. It's right and proper. Or if you want to extend it broader than just Christian circles, Romans 13, verse 7, pay to all what is owed them. We think, well, we're talking about money. Taxes to whom taxes are owed. Revenue to whom revenue is owed. Okay. Respect to whom respect is owed. Honor to whom honor is owed. Right? So, what about it, beloved? You know what. Just sit down and think. Come up, spend some time this afternoon maybe. Just write a list. People I feel have blessed me and helped me in ways that I should honor them. It won't be empty. There'll be people there. Well, then what about it, beloved? There's a phrase, right? Give your flowers to the living, not to the dead, right? This is what Jacob was doing. Now, he's getting ready to die. But he's wanting to make it a point to settle up with those who have blessed him and to honor and have helped him. And so he honors his son. I think everything about this chapter is a beautiful picture of what this father and his love and affection for his son, the recognition of the way that he was utterly powerless to bring any of these promises about. And maybe even himself didn't have the strength of character to do it. But his son did. Joseph did. Joseph he was head and shoulders above everybody the whole time, everything we read about him. And he honors him for that. That's a wonderful example. Now, one more thing to say. The way that he speaks, and it's interesting. I'm going to give you this city or this mountain or this hillside over here. It's hundreds of miles away, and we're down here in Egypt, but it's for all your kids, and I'm just going to make it known that belongs to you guys and not to anybody else. You don't speak that way unless you're pretty confident in what's going to happen. And so I'll just say this, while we can't with certainty know the future, we can act with confidence upon the promises of God for that future. What I mean is, like, Jacob has no idea what these next 400 years are going to look like. He knows at least they're going to be slaves and they're going to be treated badly at some point. He's been told that. But he don't know what this is going to look like. He doesn't know they're going to spend 40 years wandering in the desert and some generation is going to die out before they get in. He doesn't know all this stuff. He doesn't know how the conquest is going to take place, but he knows that they're going to get there. And he wants to make sure certain things happen when they do. The destination is certain, but the path they take is very unclear. And it's this way with us too, right? We know as Christians certain facts we can lay down. I know these things are going to come to pass. But kind of getting there, that we have no idea. Like, I don't know what my path's going to be. You don't know what your path's going to be. I don't know what your path's going to be, right? Either, right? Like, we don't know. We're at the mercy of God. Thank God we're at the mercy of God, right? And there are people, right, that God weaves into your life that they're there just at the right time, right? It's like you think of your life being woven in this way. It's like this thread comes in and kind of tightens everything up and keeps you here. And like if they weren't there, who knows what would have happened? And you get to the place where you realize that. Go back and say something. Listen, you didn't know it, but 7 years ago, I was going through this thing. It was hard, and you said something to me, and it totally changed my perspective on it, and it helped me get through it. And like my whole life is different now. I think about that thing that you said all the time, or this thing that you did. You didn't know it. I needed help. Whatever. You confronted. You told me I was wrong, and I didn't see it at the time, but now I know it. And thank you for being faithful to say that to me. Those kinds of things, it's huge. But to go back and honor those who have done that for us is a big deal. It's right. And we see that in this text. So, again, in terms of his confidence in what comes, I think that's an example to us, is his faith in what God has promised. But then also, again, this effort to honor those who have been a blessing to him. Now, the other thing I can really maybe take out of this text is just to look at the beauty of this picture of this man and his love for his son and his grandkids. It's a wonderful picture. Not an uncommon picture, but a good one. So, anyway, are there questions or comments on any of this?